7 minutes in the Word of God. Genesis chapter 1, verse 17. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. We could speculate as to how God set them, what God set them for, and how He did, in fact, do it. But what we're told is specific to what we hear. And what we hear is specific to what was said. And what was said is written down for us to analyze, to recognize, but more important, to pay attention to and to just accept the fact that that's what God has said. If I asked you to tell me what God has said, then you would have to tell me in Genesis chapter 1 of verse 17, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. Did God set the greater light and the lesser light? We're told God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. So if I ask you a question, I would expect you to tell me what it was that you heard. What did you hear God say? And if you told me something other than what God had said, I would say, no, that's not what God had said. That's what you interpret it to be. That's what you change or commentate or make commentary on what you think God said. But what God actually said is recorded for us in Genesis chapter 1 of verse 17. And it says, God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. In VidDevo Bible, we won't add to the Word of God because that would change the Word of God. In VidDevo Bible, we won't take away from the Word of God because that would take and make the Word of God of lesser effect. But rather, we would rather be as those who bear witness to the truth, those who speak that with which you can count on and which you can know to be true as a fact. And the fact is, we've been given the reality of creation by God Himself. God spoke, and it was so. God said, and it came into being. As we read this, we know it's the Word of God. Why? Because God said so. And as God said so, He spoke it to those that heard and repeated or shared the Word with those that heard also. And it was passed from generation to generation. And as it was passed and recorded, eventually it came to the place of time where people wrote down those things they had heard and were told from the beginning. And so we have from the beginning in Genesis chapter 1 of verse 17, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. It's not a question of changing the words to understand them. They're easily understood. It's not a question of rearranging the words so that we would better grasp them. They're easily grasped. As a matter of fact, it's so simple that a little child could accept exactly what you were saying, what is being spoken, and what is being read here in the Word of God as God has spoken it unto us. And as we are hearing it being said that in Genesis chapter 1 of verse 17, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. Them that He put into the heavens give light upon the earth. And as we know that by what we see, we now know how it came about. When people debate in theology, they are acting upon their own instigation. God didn't change anything. God didn't rearrange anything. He didn't change words. He didn't change meanings. He speaks and we hear. He reveals and we know. He accepts the fact that we have little comprehension of how to become lesser so that we can become more. And if we would become as little children, then we would accept the fact that when you're told something as a little child, you believe it with all of your heart. And as a little child would accept what's being said in Genesis chapter 1 of verse 17, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, so it should be that we should accept what God has said. We should be the ones who would be hearers of the Word and know exactly when someone argues or debates or wants to make some kind of apologetic or apologize for God. We shouldn't do that. This is what God said is the answer. When a person asks a question about what did God set in the firmament of the heaven, he set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. What did God set in the firmament of the heaven? Them. And what did he do it for? To give light upon the earth. That's it. More than that, if you ask the question, well, what does Jesus say about that? Jesus doesn't say it. God said. That's what the point is. It is the Word of God. As you have heard and as you have read and as it is being shared with you and told to you as a little child. For if we would accept what God is saying, then God would give us more. But if we can't accept the very simplicity with the complexity mixed in of what God has said, then when we get to the complex, you can't understand it because of the simplex. It's so simple that we just have to accept it. It is what God has said, and it is what God has done. So in Genesis 1 of chapter 17, you know what happened. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. You know the Word. You have heard the Word, and it has been 7 minutes in the Word of God with VidDevoBible, as we have read Genesis chapter 1, verse 17. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth.